In this video, we're going to talk about automation and management in Azure. Now, at first thought, when you're looking at an environment, you may have, say, one machine right here, and you want to monitor and manage that machine. And that monitoring and management is actually a piece of cake. You just simply connect to the one machine. You can look at the performance management or performance monitor on that machine. You look at the configurations on that machine, what software is installed, how's it configured, what's running, what's not running, and then make those changes as necessary. And that's a fairly simple process that most systems administrators are fairly familiar with. Let's say that takes maybe 10 minutes. And so you decide that you need to know that environment's up and running. And so you dedicate 10 minutes every single day working on that one machine, making sure it's up and running, that the hard drive's not full, that the web server's functioning, that everything is working on that system perfectly. Now that works really well for one machine, but here we have suddenly not just the one, but 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different machines. And if each one of those machines takes 10 minutes to run, then that means we're dedicating nearly 2 hours of our day, every single day, to look at all of these machines to make sure that they're operating properly. Well, that could become bit of a concern, a bit of an issue in our environment. So we want to look at some way to be able to manage and monitor these machines at a much larger scale. So we can start looking at these 10 or 20 or 100 or 200 machines all at the same time. And then instead of having to look at them individually, have Azure tell us exactly what's happening to all of them only when we need to know. After all, that's the whole point of the cloud environment, right? So along with that, so now we've got some monitoring into our systems, but now we maybe start having an issue with one of our web servers. Let's say that this web server right here, this is the web tier, so these are web servers, and let's say that web server right there is having some issues. Now, you've listened to me before, and the fact that the benefit of the fact that we're working in Azure means that these machines are pretty much disposable. If something's not working, we just kind of throw it away. We just get rid of it. I'm not attached to it. There's nothing special about that machine. It's just a virtual machine. So I'm going to just throw that away, and then I'm going to build out another virtual machine down here to operate as our web server, to replace that third web server. Well, that's not a problem. That's great. That's what virtual machines do. That's one of the benefits of Azure. Just turn one off, turn on another. I then have a situation where I have a virtual machine that's just simply a base Windows VM. But I want it to be more than a base Windows VM. I want it to be a web server, which means it needs to have IIS installed. It means the firewall needs to be configured. It means that it has to have rules to be able to access the mid-tier. It has to have the application, the web application installed on it. There's a lot of different configuration that still needs to be done to that machine. So even though I was able to throw away the old one and create a new one, there's still a lot of work necessary to get that going. And this is where, again, the benefits of Azure come in. We have a feature called desired state configuration. And what we can do is we can go ahead and we can define a desired state, such as a web server. And then when that one web server dies and a new one is created, what we do is we take this desired state for the web server and we apply it to that virtual machine. This means that if we have just two VMs or 2 or 3 VMs in the web tier, and then suddenly we need a lot more. Maybe there's a lot of people hitting my website. Maybe I'm expecting Black Friday to be happening soon, so there's going to be a lot of sales hitting my site. What I can do is I can just simply scale out the number of web servers in my environment and then apply the desired state configuration to them. These virtual machines see this desired state and they say, oh, I'm supposed to be a web server. Let me make myself to be a web server. That's exactly how it works. So we can set up this desired state configuration once and then apply it everywhere, and everybody is happy from that point forward. So let's go ahead and see how this works. Here I am in the Azure Portal. I've got one virtual machine in here, right there, my VM. Nothing too special about it. It's just simply a Windows Server 2016 virtual machine, but I want him to be a web server. So first thing I need to do is I need to create a desired state configuration. For that, let's go ahead and create a new in the Azure portal. And I believe I need under IT and management tools. And what I need is right here is an automation account. The automation account allows me to do all kinds of crazy things. In this case, it will allow me to run my desired state configuration. So let's go ahead and see ECG underscore automation. I don't think it likes the underscore, only dashes. There we go. Specify our subscription and our resource group. Location, West US, that works great for me. I am currently running in a lab environment where I don't have access to make this a run as account. Normally you would want that to be yes. That's perfectly fine for this situation. So as that's creating, once that's done, finished creating, we can go ahead and create our desired state configuration. All right, so that took a little bit longer than expected, but thanks to the power of video editing, that's not really a problem for us, is it? So with that done, let's go ahead and look at our resources. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and click go to that resource. It'll take me to the automation account. Here in the automation account, I can go ahead and choose a desired state configuration option. Here we can see nodes. I currently have 0 nodes. We haven't configured anything yet, so that makes perfect sense. We then have configurations, and there's currently no configurations. Let's actually create one right now. So I'll start off with a code or with a creation, and there's lots of examples down here. We can also do some source code and various parameters. So we'll start off by just giving this a name. Let's call this, what shall we call this? Web server. Sure. Does not like the dash. Let's see, any accompanying resources? I don't believe so. This is actually PowerShell. Nope, that should be it. Please fix the errors. Source code, there we go. Now we go ahead and type in our source code right here, which is this guy. Let's go ahead and paste that in. Deposit resources. You know what? Let's actually do this the other way. Let's do this from a command line. Alright, so I'm actually going to do this from a command from the console. First thing, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to change from bash into PowerShell. So I can either do that here, or I can type in from the bash pwsh, which will open up a PowerShell console. Once that's done, we want to use the code editor, and we want to specifically edit the in home/mydsc configuration.ps1. So this opens up the code editor that we can then go ahead and paste into. Hooray! With that done, I'm going to go ahead and save that. So over here, save and close. So what this is, before I close that, creates a configuration called myDSC configuration. It runs on the local host, and what it does is it says, hey, something should be present. What should be present? This web server feature should be present. Great, pretty simple. There's lots of DSC options out there that should be helpful for that, for configuring that. What we then want to do is we want to actually import this into our environment. So import dash Azure RM automation, Azure RM automation DSC configuration. Thank goodness for tab complete. Dash automation account name, and let's see, I called my name ECG dash automation dash resource group name, and my resource group is, copy and paste here. There we go. Dash source path, and the source path is currently home slash my, not home, $home slash my DSC configuration dot ps1 dash force dash publish. I did a typo. There we go. Configuration, not configuration. There we go. So that went ahead and that created the configuration for us and published it into Azure. At this point, should be able to close this out. Let's go back to desired state and let's refresh this. And there's my DSC configuration. If I click on this, I can then see that I have my configurations. No. View configuration source. There we go. There's my configuration source in there. So note I've confirmed that my configuration is there. Next thing I need to do is compile it. Compile it, basically make it an executable, something that the computer can run. So I click on that, and then right up here in the upper left hand corner I have a compile option. Do I want to compile this? Yes. Alright, so while that is compiling, I'm going to go ahead and add in my virtual machine. So I'm going to come back to the desired state configuration here up on the breadcrumb line right there. And under desired state configuration, I'm going to click add. Select nodes and click add. There we go. And this is where I specify the nodes or the virtual machines I want to be configured. There I have my virtual machine. I'm going to click on it, and then on the right hand side I'm going to say connect. So go ahead and connect to this, and it will ask me which configuration do I want. Well, I want, oh, apparently I'm running too fast. I have to wait for the configuration to finish running. Finish compiling. There we go. Compiled. Now back to add my VM, connect. There's my configuration. How fast do I want this to refresh? So that is how many minutes do I want it to review and refresh the update configuration. 30 minutes is a great time. Basically that means how often do I want to pull down and see if any of the configurations have changed. 30 minutes sounds pretty good. That means if a brand new server comes into my environment, it might take up to 30 minutes for it to receive the configuration. It also means if I change something, it will take up to 30 minutes for machines to be able to see that change. Configuration mode frequency. How many times or how frequently does desired state configuration attempt to update itself, to review the configuration? Remember, this configuration we're attempting here is looking for what the web server to be installed. This means that if I go in and I manually uninstall the web server, after or up to 15 minutes later, the desired state configuration will run, see that the web server is not installed, and then reinstall the web server. So it's a great way to be able to stop junior admins or people who don't know what they're doing from making changes to your environment and then just leaving them that way. Configuration mode. Do I want to apply? Do I want to apply and autocorrect or apply and monitor? Apply and monitor is probably the best solution right here. It will apply it and then continue to monitor it and fix it if necessary. Allow override. Will new modules overwrite the old modules? Yes. Reboot if needed. If I'm doing some sort of a configuration such as joining to a domain, do I want it to automatically apply and reboot? Yes. And then after reboot, go ahead and configure, continue or stop. If I have multiple configurations in here, I may want to specify stop. I only want it to do one configuration at a time, or continue and do all the configurations at the same time. Go ahead and say OK. We'll wait for that connection to go ahead and take effect. All right, still attempting, still connecting. Actually, while that's running, let's go ahead and we'll go back to the configuration, the automation management. So that's desired state configuration here. As we click refresh, eventually a configured node number will increase, and then the compliant number will increase as well. It will tell us if anything has failed, if anything is non-compliant, pending, in progress. It will give us those stats, and then we can view the various nodes down here as well as their current state. There is a gallery of various configurations that we might want to look in our environment. For instance, we're doing IIS. Well, there's a gallery configuration right there for configuring IIS on a Windows server. There are tons of other configurations pre-created for us to look through and apply to our own environment. Additionally, through here, there is update management. This won't work for me because I don't have permissions. Update management, if you have worked with Windows Server Update Services or WSUS, in order to download updates to a central management server and then deploy them to your environment, this update management is an online version, essentially, of WSUS. The next item that I really enjoy about this is process automation, or runbooks. So with runbooks, let's go ahead and create a new runbook, and let's call this just, I don't know, test runbook. And then what type of runbook do we want? This can be PowerShell, Python, or a graphical interface. To begin with, I would suggest a graphical one, just because it's a little bit easier to see and understand what's going on. And lo and behold, last time I ran this, it gave us a sample runbook. This time it doesn't. So what we can do is through here, we can see kind of a visual flowchart, what would look like a visual flowchart of activities, and then we can describe those activities here, as opposed to writing all these in code. So for instance, say we wanted to have a system. Let's see, let's go ahead and look for login. Log on. Connect. There we go. There's disconnect remote. I want connect. There we go, connect. So say we wanted to connect, what we would do is we just simply drag and drop that in. There we go, add. And that will add into the canvas right here. And then we can add in an additional connection such as test and add that in here. And once those are in there, then we can drag and drop precedents. So in this case, connect PS session would occur, and then test connection would occur. These are literally PowerShell commands, so we can go ahead and we can configure various parameters, such as test connection. Well, that's going to be looking for an IP address. Sure, default. And then 8.8.8.8 and okay. And so through this is a little bit easier to create our PowerShell scripts. Let's see. Cancel that, save it. This is the runbook, right? Let's go back. Maybe the gallery. There we go. Start Azure Virtual 2. That's what I was looking for. Apparently they moved these samples into the gallery so that when you start up, you don't just get the defaults, you have to import them via the gallery. Edit. There we go. So there's a nice little flow. Get the run as connection. How do I actually connect to Azure? Get the connection in credentials and then go ahead and connect. So we got the nice little arrow there saying go ahead and connect. It then splits off into 3 different tasks: getting a single VM, getting all VMs, or getting all VMs in a subscription, and then pipes that into the manage or merge VMs commands, filters them on status, and then starts or notifies what's happening. So there's a great example of a graphical runbook. Now, when we look at these, for instance, connect to Azure, we can see this is actually running the add Azure RM account. It's just adding in running the PowerShell command to connect to Azure Resource Manager. The nice little graphical runbook here makes it easy to understand the flow, especially for people who've not fully versed in PowerShell and scripting and programming logic. There's other sample runbooks, for instance. For instance, we could look for Python scripts to be able to create our machines if we're familiar with Python, or PowerShell scripts if we're familiar with PowerShell, such as running the inventory of all of the machines in the environment. I'm going to go ahead and save this one, and I'll show exactly how to run it. And then when we're done with the run, we'll go back to the desired state configuration. See, so that's Azure Run or Azure VM right here. What we can do, where is start? The start button is grayed out. Traditionally, you click start and it just simply runs in the background. Like I said, this has changed since last time I ran it. So anyways, the overall idea of a runbook is that you can create all of these tasks in a runbook here, such as if I click edit. Oh, that's probably why. So you create these tasks in a runbook. The cool thing about runbooks is the runbooks can have different permissions than the person who's running it. For instance, if the runbook creates user accounts, creates virtual machines, changes permissions in the environment, I can then give permissions to a low-end admin, somebody who doesn't have those permissions. I can give them permissions to run the runbook, and then they will be acting as if they are creating users or creating virtual machines in the environment. Even though they don't have permissions to create users and VMs, the runbook does, and they have permissions to run the runbook. All right, so I downloaded that, I ran it, and then we see the output here, and it says, yep, here's the output of your command. In this case, it was a fairly simple Azure inventory resource job, which wasn't all that exciting. Specifically gave me an error message. Oops. That's perfectly normal in this case anyways. So the great thing about runbooks, you can essentially tie all of the tasks you would have for a server or server environment. So for instance, we may have various tasks for a web server, such as build a web server, decommission a web server. There may be update code, add users, and so on and so on and so on. And so we build all of these tasks as various runbooks. All of these tasks may be similar to what we have for other systems. So for instance, the add user task could be shared with other systems, and more than just the web servers, but also with the middle tier or the back end. I then compile all of these into a runbook, and then I could run the individual tasks either manually, automatically according to a schedule, via a schedule, or via some other activity that's happening in the system, such as maybe there's too much CPU being used, so I'm going to reboot the SQL server, as well as via a remote, what's called a webhook, which is essentially a type of an API that I call via a web request and cause those tasks to trigger. So I put all of my tasks together into one runbook, and then I just call that runbook as appropriate. All right, so with that being said, let's go back to the desired state configuration. Let's just go to all resources, find our not desired state, our automation, and then our desired state configuration. And we should see, yes, we have one node that is currently compliant in its status. So we can look here and see, yes, this guy is up and running. Initially, it was bad. At 10:16 a.m., it was not compliant. It failed. But then at 10:18, it is now compliant, which means that that desired state went ahead and applied. Now, if I look at that virtual machine, if I go back to all resources and I fire up my virtual machine and I see what my public IP is right there, I can go ahead and, using a web browser, browse to that web page, and I should hopefully see a web page. Yeah, so the web server actually installed IIS. It was a brand new install. I did not do anything to it. It installed IIS and gave me the sample page. Now, the configuration was literally just install IIS, so there wasn't really a whole lot that I had in there, but it ran anyway. So that's two of the configuration items. One was to, there we go, in the automation account. One was to set up configuration management. There is also inventory, which won't work for me, and change tracking, which won't work for me, simply because I don't have permissions to do it. Inventory basically will inventory everything on that virtual machine. I can then look for everybody that has a web server installed. Change tracking. Well, there was a web server installed here yesterday. There's not a web server in here today. That's a change management issue. We then talked about process automation with Runbooks in order to automate all of those configurations. And since we're here, since we're talking about resource management and automation, let's look into Azure Monitor. Because not only do we want to manage all of these machines, we want to monitor them as well. So for Azure Monitor, it allows us to look at the performance metrics for all of these machines at the same time. So what we want to do is we want to add in some alerts. In this case, an alert. And let's create a new alert rule. What resources do we want this to apply to? And in this case, I want this to apply to my virtual machine. Let's see, filter by type, virtual machine. And virtual machines. There we go. And it shows me my virtual machine. I'll go ahead and click done for that. And then what condition do I want? Well, there's a whole bunch of different conditions here that we can look at. CPU, network, disk delay, OS issues, and so on. We even go into pages 2 and 3. Wow, there's a whole lot of things that we can look for there. I'm going to start off by looking at the percentage of CPU. Oftentimes, that's the very first thing you look at in an environment. It starts off by telling me, hey, currently you're at 19%. Previously, you spiked as high as 51. So it shows me for the last several hours in my environment. Last 6 hours. I could go over last week. But since this machine has only been online for about 20 minutes, it's not going to have a whole lot of information there. Next, I have some alert logic. I can specify a static threshold or a dynamic threshold. Dynamic threshold, what it does is it looks through this history here and it says, hey, you've been averaging between, say, 30 and 50%. So therefore, if you go above it or below that, I'm going to give you an alert. That could be really helpful for environments that you're not entirely sure about. However, I'm going to start with a static. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, if this machine averages more than, say, 80% CPU utilization. General rule of thumb, if any resource in your environment, CPU, disk, memory, network, whatever, if any resource exceeds an average of 80%, that means it's probably time to begin upgrading. Things just start slowing down once they reach 70% or 80%. So when the average is greater than 80%, then I want to go ahead and create an alert. This is my condition statement. I can specify how much I want that average to be. Is that an average over 1 minute? Is that an average over 5 minutes? Or an average over an hour? 5 minutes is the default. That's probably pretty good. And then evaluate that every minute. So every minute it will look at the last 5 minutes and see, are you over 80% CPU usage? If so, then do something. So I'll say yes. And then actions, let's go ahead and create an action. Oh, actually I can't do that just yet. Let's go ahead and specify an alert. Now let's call this CPU utilization. CPU utilization high, and here I could put a description. My VM CPU is high. Specify severity. This helps out in the alert that's popping up. And then do I want to enable this rule right now? Yes. But before I do that, let's go ahead and talk about these action groups. Action groups allow me to do much more. So let's call this test action group. Test. Sure. And then I can put an action name here, test, and then an action type such as running a runbook. Ooh, hey, we just talked about those. Kicking off an Azure function, which we talked about several weeks ago. Emailing somebody, email or texting or calling somebody, calling off a logic app, calling a web app, a webhook, or some other logic app. Probably the SMS message is the most popular one. So let's go ahead and call email. Actually, let's do a text. And then the famous 555-1212. Actually, let's do a 206-867-5309. Looks like it. Nope, that took it. So when we exceed 80%, what we're going to do is we're going to send a text to Jenny. I know you're wondering who Jenny is. And say okay and okay. And this will error out because I don't have permission. All right, last time I tried this, it errored out because I didn't have permissions. Apparently it took it this time. So now I say create rule, and it says it can take up to 10 minutes for this to become active. It just takes a couple of minutes for that to occur. So there we go. The rule is being created, and it is now evaluating that system to see once you exceed 80% for over 5 minutes, go ahead and trigger an alert. And there were a lot of other alert metrics we could have looked at there. Actually, I won't even go into them. CPU, disk, network, and so on. Along with that, we can also look at the logs for the servers. We can have log analytics occurring on that server and look for specific error messages, such as critical messages that are running in the environment, or that can then trigger alerts and other activities, such as workbooks in our environment. So there we have it, our automation and management environment, specifically tailored towards a larger environment where we might have 10, 20, or 1,000 different servers in our environment. That is physically too many, too big for us to manually manage. But once we have automation, such as our desired state configuration. And we have management, such as our runbooks and our monitoring. Then we can start managing all of these machines. The managing of 10 machines versus 1,000 machines, there is no difference at that point. It's just simply the volume of alerts you might possibly get. That's a very small increase in your workload by going from 10 to 1,000. So hopefully you enjoyed this automation and management. I enjoyed creating it. Have a great day.